Okay, let's set the scene here. Picture a typical Friday evening, right? The work week is finally over. And while a ton of people are out there frantically coordinating dinner reservations, trying to navigate crowded bars, or just, managing the chaotic energy of a packed house, there's this guy who unlocks his front door to absolute silence. He walks in, drops his keys, exhales, and there's nobody there. No girlfriend, no wife, and here's the kicker. He doesn't care. In fact, he completely loves it. His place is quiet, his routine is entirely his own, and he's genuinely, undeniably fine with the whole shebang. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the fascinating psychology behind this exact phenomenon. We're looking closely at men who've built solitary lives and actually thrive in them, and we're breaking down the science of why this quiet, independent lifestyle is, well, totally misunderstood by the rest of the world.
So why do some men happily live completely alone? I mean, think about your own knee-jerk reaction to that scenario. Usually when people see a guy happily living on his own for years on end, society immediately assumes something is fundamentally wrong, right? The cultural stereotypes are super deep here. People automatically jump to, oh, he must be a weird loner hiding from the world, or he's just that confirmed bachelor who literally can't find anyone. We are so conditioned to view coupledom as the ultimate default state of success that we kind of view solitary living as a total failure to launch. But as we unpack the data and the source material for you today, you're going to see a massive paradigm shift. Because while society assumes there's some deep flaw, psychology tells us the exact opposite is usually true.
Yeah, so society assumes isolation, acute loneliness, and this kind of tragic inability to attract a partner. But psychology, it completely flips the script. What looks like a deficit on the outside is actually an absolute abundance of autonomy, a profound sense of peace, and incredibly high personal standards. The outside world looks at a solitary man and sees this huge void like a missing puzzle piece, but his internal psychological reality, it's often one of total completeness. We're going to explore how a lifestyle that looks so defective or lonely to an outsider is actually driven by a deeply intentional desire for independence. It's a complete shift from viewing alone time as a punishment to recognizing it as a highly curated, very intentional environment.
All right, let's get into Section 1, the myth of isolation. Alone versus isolated.
Let's actually move past those surface-level assumptions and completely dismantle the idea that being alone is the exact same thing as being isolated, because they aren't. We really need to look at the core human needs that are being fulfilled by this lifestyle instead of focusing on what's supposedly missing. And the first real psychological driver here boils down to something called autonomy satisfaction. In psychology, this is defined as a fundamental core human need to feel entirely in control of your own time, your own space, and your own decisions. I mean, imagine a past relationship where literally every evening involved some kind of negotiation: what to watch, where to eat, when to turn the lights out. Over time, that constant compromise can feel super draining. For a lot of men, living completely alone isn't about running away from people, it's about running toward this specific feeling of total self-governance. It hits that need for autonomy satisfaction right on the head.
Let's ground this in some everyday, relatable micro-examples, because this is where it gets real. Think about never having to negotiate the thermostat. If you want it freezing cold while you sleep, boom, it's freezing cold. Think about never compromising your weekend schedule. If you want to wake up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday to wrench on a motorcycle or, sleep in until noon because you were up late reading, you just do it. No questions asked. It's full, unadulterated ownership of your life. When you don't have to check in with anyone to set the temp in the living room, figure out dinner time, or justify your Sunday afternoon plans, you get this very specific, potent rush of environmental control. And the crucial takeaway here is that this control, it's not a form of loneliness. It is a genuine, continuous source of peace that, honestly, most people rarely get to experience.
Moving right along to Section 2, the psychology of solitude, from being to preference. Okay, now that we kind of get the appeal of autonomy, let's shift gears and look at the brain itself. We've got to see how a man's brain naturally adapts to this environment and how, over time, a quiet living situation turns from just a state of being into a hardwired preference. First, he experiences this calm, undisturbed environment. Then, because that setup consistently feels so good, his brain actually starts associating alone time with a reward instead of a lack of company. We're talking about dopamine here. The brain's reward center starts firing not when someone else walks into the room, but when the front door closes and the peace begins. And finally, through habituation, that positive association gets reinforced every single day. So eventually, solitude stops feeling like an absence of a partner and fully transforms into a highly rewarded daily preference. The brain literally learns to crave the quiet.
That brings us to Section 3, emotional needs and standards. Needs already met.
This is where we really have to tackle one of the most stubborn societal misconceptions out there. This idea that men who live alone are emotionally stunted, avoidant, or somehow totally undesirable. To actually understand their emotional world, we have to look at a psychological pattern called secure attachment without dependency. Basically, a lot of these guys are exceptionally good at forming deep, meaningful bonds with friends, family members, and their work. Just picture a guy who hosts Sunday dinners for his siblings, plays in a weekly basketball league with tight-knit friends, and mentors junior folks at his job. He is heavily connected. This existing network meets his emotional needs so incredibly well that his whole emotional world is completely stabilized. And because he isn't carrying around this massive emotional void, a romantic relationship suddenly becomes totally optional. He isn't desperately looking for a partner to fill a gap, because frankly, there is no gap to fill.
And you know, this emotional stability fundamentally shifts how these men approach dating altogether. On top of having their emotional needs met through their community, many of these men are shaped by what psychologists call preference clarity. This means knowing exactly, with absolute certainty, what kind of life partner and what kind of relationship you actually want. When you aren't out there dating from a place of desperation or loneliness, you have the incredible luxury of absolute clarity. You know exactly what enhances your life and what takes away from it. With this level of self-awareness, your behavior changes radically. You completely stop going on dates just to avoid a lonely Friday night, and you start evaluating potential partners against the phenomenal peace you've already built.
When someone has that intense preference clarity, they naturally become far less willing to settle for anything less than exactly what they want, even if that means staying single for years. Society absolutely loves to label this as a major flaw. People will say, oh, he's way too picky, or he's emotionally unavailable, or just impossible to please. But actually, scratch that. It's not pickiness at all. It is self-knowledge doing its exact job. It's a successful result of knowing who you are, knowing exactly what brings you peace, and fiercely protecting it from chaos. I mean, why on earth would someone invite disruption into a sanctuary they've spent years carefully building? They just wouldn't. These high standards are a feature of their mental health, for sure, not a bug.
All right, last major part here. Section 4, redefining a complete life, beyond milestones.
Let's elevate this explainer to a slightly more philosophical level for a second. We've talked about the brain and the emotional networks, but there's something even deeper happening here. It's about how these men view the very concept of a successful life. Society relentlessly frames a man living alone as incomplete, right? There is this pervasive underlying narrative that he's just sitting in the waiting room of life, waiting for a partner to finally arrive and make his life real or make it count. Just think about the immense pressure that puts on people. This idea that your current existence is just a preamble to the main event. But the men we're talking about, they have completely moved past that framing. The liberation they feel comes from stepping entirely out of that waiting room and realizing, hey, the main event has already started.
Instead of playing along, they quietly reject those traditional societal milestones. They ignore the rigid timeline that says you need to be married by 30 and living in a chaotic, busy house by 35. They look around and realize their life already works perfectly as it is. And here's the part that most people get dead wrong. A man living alone isn't necessarily avoiding connection or hiding from intimacy. Often, it's the exact opposite. He's completely capable of love and connection, but he is simply unwilling to trade a life that already works beautifully for a relationship that doesn't clearly, definitively improve it. It's simple math. If adding someone to the equation doesn't make the math better, he's perfectly content keeping the equation as a party of one.
What looks like isolation from the outside is frequently just contentment from the inside. I love that. When you see a guy reading a book in a perfectly quiet apartment on a Friday night, drinking a good cup of coffee, just staring out the window, you might automatically project your own fear of loneliness onto him. You might just assume he's sad. But true contentment rarely feels the need to explain itself to outside observers. He isn't putting on a show for anyone. He's just quietly, authentically enjoying his life. The silence isn't heavy for him. It's a blanket of comfort that he has intentionally wrapped himself in.
Ultimately, a man happily living alone isn't always missing something. He isn't the victim of circumstance, and he definitely isn't someone who just failed at the dating game and retreated in defeat. He literally hasn't missed out on the core human experience. More often than not, he has just found something that most people spend their entire lives frantically searching for in other people and sadly never actually find. Genuine, unshakable peace with his own company. He is his own best friend, his own caretaker, and the absolute architect of his own joy. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to turn the lens back on you. Are you measuring your life by someone else's milestones? It is so incredibly easy to blindly accept society's definition of what a complete, successful life should look like. We are fed these scripts from the time we're kids,
But the psychology of men who live happily alone proves that fulfillment really isn't a one-size-fits-all equation. Think about it. Sometimes the most fulfilling life you can possibly build is the one you build entirely for yourself.